Ah, glad to see that you've all come back. It's been a good time. You know, since our last visit, my joy for the hunt has been restored. And I see that your joy for the hunt has came back as well. I've also see that you have brought some new members to join our pack. I hope you all consider on joining us. We have to help us to restore the hunting grounds and to reawaken the creative beast that lies dormant in most people. You know, when we come across certain parts in our lives, obstacles that we have to overcome. These obstacles defines us as who we really are, and it will push us to the point where we have to make a choice. Do we push on, or do we surrender to our fate? That is where we know who we really are. Are we predator or are we prey? We are predators. We are beasts. We are wolves. We are hunters. Story hunters. This is the Story Hunter pack. I'm Red, the Alpha. And one thing that I would encourage you all, that when you reach to the point where you're about to reach your limit, when you are about to reach your limit, never give up. Keep hunting until you take down that prey. As we will see soon tonight. So, let's gather the rest of the pack. And we got a prey to resume.
Perfect.
There it is, Cold Blood, Fables by Bill Keeper. This right here, for some of those who have not been since last time, I encourage you to purchase the book. And if we have leftovers somewhere over there, where you can partake and catch up. When you're ready, we'll resume. So, there are a few things. So this book, the Fate of Fables, is an intriguing prey with risks, dangers, romance, and good noir mixed in between these morsels of pages. I would encourage you to purchase this prey. The Storyhunter procured for us to partake. There are 6 servings within this prey, and some of it may not be suitable for all of you. But we're going to resume this part of our serving, Shepherd. Shepherd is a renowned detective who put his entire reputation and career on the line for one woman, for one boy. So since that you've all most likely caught up, or you've been with us last time, I'd still encourage you to recap of what happened. Shepherd is established as renowned police detective of the Red Call Police District, who centers his life on his career. Due to this, he's called for assistance even if he was busy. In one such instance, his cousin Rex requested that he call him for a special family emergency. Believing this to be a temporary break, Shepard entertained the call. Shepard came to his home and see that Rex was not alone in his house. He was with another wolf, Lynn, his lost love. Lynn pleads to Shepard to take her case to save her son who has been kidnapped. Shepard debates with himself. You see, Shepard, Rex, and Lynn's husband have all agreed to cook up a plan to use Blake to spark an investigation against the evil cult. Shepard decided to accept the call. Here is where I should have expounded on the last time, so I'll be quick about it. We have a huge morsel of meat inside the story. There is a call to adventure. This encourages and pushes the antagonist to do something they usually wouldn't do. It should be something that challenges them, makes the stakes of the situation a lot more crucial and vital. If this had been any other case, it would either be a boring story or there would be no story at all. Remember, when it comes to taking down your prey, it doesn't matter if the story is bad, just don't make it boring. Without further ado, let's resume. Shepard drove across Brooklyn without a siren running. He stopped only once to call in his location to his partner and to grab his sandwich. He suspected that it might be the last chance to eat for a while, plus it gave him time to think. By the time he headed out to Garrisville, he had convinced himself he could make this all work out for him in the end, if the boy was there. If he was able to rescue Lynn's boy, if he hadn't killed him yet. Shepard wasn't sure what he'd do if Blake wasn't in the hands of the cult. Flexibility wasn't a quality that he was known for. He parked down a side street under the New Amsterdam Bridge overpass, which dominated the neighborhood. The area had been slowly sliding colder in recent years. There were rats everywhere. Horrible place. But then it had never been a garden spot, better here than in his own Red Claw district. The Illuminati Arcana, despite what Rex thought he knew, wasn't just a church that he could burn down. There were some rich and powerful people behind the sect. Educated people that should know better than to believe in demons and magic, but stupidity and ignorance were like weeds. Especially for egomaniacs with too much time on their hands. He armed himself with a pair of brass knuckles. You never knew when a raptor would turn on you with their lightning reflexes. Shepard knew he'd only get one shot if he had to throw a punch. His gun was all but useless. Reps didn't feel pain like normal people. It often took days to die. He thanked thrice that they were lazy and unambitious, otherwise the monsters would be ruling the world. Diego pulled up in his cruiser and parked behind his transportee. Ready to commit to some good old-fashioned detective work? Shepard asked as he met the mutt between the cars. The detective smiled and shrugged. I'm ready to bust some heads, he allowed. Together they walked towards the next pub. Diego's driver, the short Highlander Terrier, called out, What do you want me to do? Stay? Leave? Watch my baby, Lucky, Shepard called out. It's not a safe neighborhood at this time of night. The sun had 2 hours before it would set, but already a New Amsterdam's bridge shadow had set the neighborhood in darkness. Reps bleed like anyone. It just takes a little more effort. As Shepard and Diego moved from one watering hole to another, word spread. From the pub's empty ahead of their visitations, the two began to bust up. Speed cop was suddenly scarce, not that they were all too common under the bridge to begin with. Bars that chose to close had their windows broken, Shepard made it clear that fire would be the next step. He wanted information and they were going to give it to him. At 10 o'clock, the Alsatian's persistence paid off. The Eagle and Shepard walked into Ray's hookah parlor and found 6 brute reps standing in the middle of the floor. The Eagle paused, but not because of the dragons. Behind these hulking figures, the shadows swarmed with skinks. Creepy little buggers. They were practically snakes. Biters. Shepard didn't care. He smiled and stepped forward, taking his fist out of his pocket. He had beaten in so many cold heads that his hands had swollen to the point where he couldn't get the brass knuckles off his hands if he had wanted to. They throbbed with a pain that felt glorious. He could almost believe that he was doing God's work. "Hello, boys," he said and placed his bloodied bowler on the decorative hookah in the middle of the room. "You know why I'm here, I'm sure." The big fellows glanced at each other and nodded. Reps weren't human enough to have facial expressions. They weren't just called cold folk because their blood ran cold. Shepard counted on their natural pragmatism. The big black brute of a gecko in the center reached behind his back and pulled a figure forward. In the neon light from the window, Shepard thought this was some sort of fat pig for a moment. Then Diego gasped as the skinks fell away, leaving a gasping Anole in tattered clothes between the detectives and his neighbors. His throat began inflating and deflating rapidly as the extent of his betrayal became obvious. He glared at the reps half in shadow. The brutes avoided his eyes and kept their hands still. The Anole looked at Shepard. "I didn't do nothing." Shepard stepped forward and grabbed the rep by his rapidly deflating dewlap. The Anole screeched high and loud, but closed its snout as the bloody detective brought his muzzle close. With his other hand, the dog reached out and pulled gently on a black cord on the whimpering male's throat. With a few gentle pulls, he brought the little brass water wheel round to where he could see it. The Anole flinched as a holy object clinked against Shepard's bloody brass knuckles in the silent place. "The Church of Arcane Illumination, I take it." Shepard let the water wheel fall back against Rep's dewlap as the male began to make the hiccuping noises his people made when they wanted to pretend to cry. "You must be a very special cold boy for them to take you for one of their own." The Anole closed his eyes. I'm a carpenter." "Of course you are." Thrice was a carpenter, and the Illuminati Arcana had a way of twisting the works of Thrice. They needed carpenters for all their terrible works. Choosing them from their least of humanity was SOP for them. Shepard smiled with triumph and pulled the skinny, struggling Anole towards the front door. He called out, "No alcohol here! Thank you boys for your cooperation. Carry on!" Diego backed out of the door. "Don't worry, we'll return him in one piece, if he cooperates. Like you, I'm sure he understands the value of cooperation." They walked the Anole carpenter, Jesus Noropes, the 5 blocks back to where they left the rookie. Dozens of skinks escorted them, keeping to the shadows, and only occasionally darting out in the blink of an eye. Low and fast, almost supernaturally impossible to spot. Only the sounds of hundreds of claws clicking against the concrete and brick betrayed their presence. The eagle's fur stood straight up, even under his clothes. Now that the escalating violence was over, the implied threats of violence of a skink swarm was eating at his nerves. Shepard was unaffected by nerves. In the working gaslights, the rep's head was a black-green and his dewlap a bright contrasting orange. He refused to take a creature like Jesus seriously. That the code community had turned him over suggested that he had few friends here. The little creepy crawlers were there as much as to keep the Anole from running away, as much to keep Shepard and Diego honest. "Tell me, Jesus," the Alsatian said, "what have you made for the church lately?" Shepard kept his voice conversational, as if he wasn't tugging the man about by the sensitive neckskin. "The exorcism wheel," the combatant sputtered. "We go through a few of those every year. After the demon expelled, he's trapped in the wheel until they burn it.
Shepard nodded as if this was a sensible thing to do. It was for that reason that the church's exorcism required a stiff donation. He thought it was a scam, but then there were more than one Christian sect performed this service. It was a tradition that all but predated the Common Era. Tell me, what was so special with this one? The gnome stumbled, tripping over his own tail. I never said there was. Shepard jerked him back up to his feet with a tug on the orange hide. Don't jerk me around, Jesus. I'll make a valise out of all this extra skin you got here. He rolled a pinch of flesh between his thumb and fingers. It's so soft. I bet it take a die well, don't you? The comforter hiccuped up in terror, and his hands flailed with emotional distress. Shepard held firm and an appraising grin on his face. After a moment, he almost stuttered. I was just doing my job, he whined. I didn't do nothing wrong. I never said you did, Shepard said calmly. In fact, we're here because you're an upstanding citizen, a voluntary witness. You are going to tell me what I need to know, aren't you? Then, without even looking back, Shepard twisted his bloody fist 180 degrees. Yes! The gnome screamed. Yes, I'll tell you everything. Just stop doing that. Stop! Shepard threw the hiccuping wrapped in the back of the police vehicle, and Jesus spilled it all. The strange glyphs, the huge size of the wheel, and the bodyboard that would fit a pup of a certain size. Shepard nodded at all of this. He had studied these lunatics for almost 2 decades, ever since they contributed to his father's mental decline, even before he'd been disinherited. It all made a warped kind of sense. The Illuminati Arcana believed in monsters, little monsters that could change species and had special powers. The 7th son of a 7th son of a wolf was thought to have a special something that invited demons and death. In Western Europe, it was called a black dog, and was thought to have a benevolent side, or maybe a twisted sense of justice. The myth varied from the highlands to the coast of Port Iscale. In America, the cult had twisted the half-forgotten myth to fit some sort of insane agenda. Waldo had been kidnapped by the cult when he was a boy, and had endured 3 months of the torturous exorcism before promising not to have children. He was lucky to have escaped with his balls. The first thing he did when he got away was to convert to fabulism. Aesop might have strange stories about Evi that could fly like little birds and asses that could talk like men, but he was never cruel or obscure. He could see the allure, except life was cruel. The path of righteousness was obscure. Diego, take him back to the headquarters. Take a statement, the monk nodded. Shepard patted the head of the annul as he would a child. I need you to repeat everything you just told me when you get back to the station house. The wheel, the death glyphs, the vacant warehouse you delivered it to, and the plans you overheard about the kidnapping of Wolf Pub over in the West Washington Heights. I didn't hear. Don't sass me, boy. Do what I say and you'll be back here by morning, sipping on bug juice like nothing had ever happened. The gnome nodded his dark head. Beaten. Shepard made sure the rep had his tail in hand before he slammed the door shut. He leaned over to Diego and whispered instructions to make sure the little rookie understood what to say and not to say. Diego's eyes and ears rolled in sync. This wasn't his first rodeo. He asked if Shepard would rather switch duties. Your hands are pretty shot. Are you even going to be able to use your gun? Shepard looked at his bloodied and swollen fist, and he barked a little laugh. He used his mouth to work the brass knuckles off his right hand, and Diego grabbed at his left. He saw stars, but they got the dusters off. Shepard took a deep breath, and the mutt repeated his suggestion to the Alsatian, type up the report, and let him go check out the warehouse. Shepard shook his head and pretended that hadn't cost him a bit. He was getting too old for all this hot dogging, but he needed to do this for Len. You've seen me type, D. Besides, these are just a couple of priests. 3 or 4 at the most. I won't need my gun. Diego looked him over, but he was tired too. He knew Shepard could fight until dawn if he wanted to. He nodded shortly and then ran around to the passenger side. The gnome knocked at the window as Shepard was about to walk back to the Paforde. Shepard opened the back door. Diego hopped into the front. Detective, there was just one other thing that was strange about the wheel I made. said from the couch where he was curled awkwardly.
The bodyboard, the straps, they were all on the wrong side.
Shepard had learned out west how to use pain to focus himself. Shifting the .440 with his swollen right hand was painful, but he took it and concentrated on the act of driving. The slipped grip meant slipping gears, and that lost time. He kept at it, his destination his only concern. He knew every road in Brooklyn. He didn't worry about having a plan. Shepard was a steamroller. He'd crush everything in his path. The address that the annulled gave him was in Red Claw, not quite in his precinct, but close enough for him to take this as a sign that he was meant to rescue the boy. Waldo would forgive him if he brought the church down, then would forgive anything if she got her youngest back. He'd even please Rex, but he stopped himself from going down that path. He'd chosen this action. Shepard forced himself to not worry about the consequences. God lit his path. He was righteous. He drove around the block. He spotted 2 guards at the entrance. It wasn't a wharfside warehouse, but a former ice house. He hoped that was all that Jesus had gone wrong. He stopped behind the building. None of the huge garage doors were guarded, but they must be locked down, probably from the inside. He let the car roll forward to the next building. There was a night watchman in that building. Shepard flashed his badge, and the old bear seemed to drop 10 years. "I need to get to the roof," the younger man said. The bear merely nodded and led him up 3 flights to a trap door that opened up to a cantilevered rooftop. The guard cupped his flashlight and directed half a beam of light to a half-fallen-apart water tower. "If you climb that ladder, you can step over to the ice house." Shepard nodded, staring at the path he needed to take. The bear's short leg wouldn't cross that span, and his jumping days were long behind him. "I need you to go downstairs and make a phone call for me." Shepard told him who to call, who to ask for, and what to say. The bear nodded, eager to help, to see some action again. He waited until Shepard crossed from the water tower platform before running off to play his parts in this little drama. Shepard hoped he'd never be that pathetic when he got old. "I'm just going to have to die young," he whispered to himself as he sneaked across the rooftop. The gallows humor helped and kept him looking down over the edge of the building. 4 stories would probably not kill him. He found a row of skylights. Candles and torches burned on the floor. It was right out of a dime store novel. Shepard gasped and cursed under his breath as he tried prying one of the skylights open. "Damn hands. I'm going to have to get bigger brass knuckles." He found an office window in a small 5th-floor portion. Someone must have wanted an office with a view of the port. Someone who liked a lot of fresh air. And unlatched windows just needed a little elbow grease to open enough to allow Shepard through. A desk lamp still worked. He found a ring of keys, half a bottle of rum, and a calendar 6 years out of date. In the hall, he found an open first aid kit, sterile bandages from once upon a time. Shepard had taken boxing lessons a long time ago. He knew how to tape himself up. He kept it light and made sure that he could hold and aim his gun. Stiff and painful, but it would have to do. He found the stairwell easily enough, and his thin luck failed him here. It was pitch black. Shepard headed down as silently as possible, hoping that his caution didn't get the boy killed. His sense heightened. He heard only his breathing, only his own footfalls. He counted his steps and the landings. The lower he went, the more grit was on the steps. But the 2nd floor, the debris was getting a little slippery. The noise of his footsteps were as loud as a horse chewing bamboo. He decided to step out on the 2nd floor before his nerves could undo his courage. The door made a small creaking noise, but he stepped out into flickering torchlight unnoticed. The 2nd floor, little more than a row of offices to the right, and a railing overlooking what must have been where they stored the frozen slabs of river ice when the place was a working concern. He peered cautiously over the railing, knowing his blonde mask might be visible even in this low light. A floor below him, there were tarps covering a large portion of the center of the concrete. Candles and torchlight flickered 100 small shadows and a few islands of light. Against the far wall, the water wheel stood in near darkness. Shepard made out what he assumed was a well around the wheel. It was a giant baptismal font, or rather, it was an oversized baptismal. No doubt it faced homeland like it would in most churches. And then the child was strapped, naked and upside down on the damnable thing, with his head inches from the edge of the wheel. A pain of panic raced through Shepard's mind, but he didn't flinch. He didn't look away until his eyes adjusted enough to let him know Blake was still alive. Shepard barely registered the breath that he held in. Other than the small black-furred figure strapped on the water wheel, there appeared to be no one around. Shepard knew his good luck could not last much longer. His instincts told him not to use the enclosed stairwell. The second floor wrapped around the open space, and the section behind the wheel was darker still. He needed to watch for the cultists that he knew were nearby. He skulked off, head low as if wary of oncoming arrows. Shepard thought he might find another way down there. Suddenly, the Alsatian's ears twitched. He stood in the darkness and let his eyes adjust. He wasn't even sure he'd heard something. After a moment, he heard a series of soft sounds from deeper in the darkness. He took a cautious step or two forward. A cat's head appeared out of darkness like a wraith. Shepard pulled his gun before he even realized it. The only thing that kept him from firing was that head wasn't facing him. The head floated upward in a smooth, rocking movement that seemed eerie until the dog realized that the feline was simply dressed in a black corsac and climbing a ladder. I really hate cats. Even more than Diego hates skinks. I hate cats. Can I please go through the night without any more friggin' cats? It was the closest Shepard had come to praying in years. The cultists stopped on the third or fourth floor. After a moment, Shepard heard a click and then chain rattling. Then the cat grunted and something creaked. Shepard's eyes then made out a tube, a 4-inch wide pipe that vanished in the darkness. Towards where the water wheel stood, Shepard climbed onto the ladder. He had to resist the urge to climb up and take out the cat. His priority was the boy, and he couldn't climb up and take out the cat. Cats tended to have better vision in the dark. He stepped down as silently as possible, hoping the twisting and squeaking metal covered his descent. Near the bottom run, the squeaking stopped, and a voice called out,
"Who's that?"
Shepard found the ground and stumbled back even as the flashlight beamed, shining down from above. He held his breath, sprawled on the floor, as the spotlight jittered around the base of the ladder.
"Brother Mike?"
The voice from above called down, but the dog stayed silent, forced himself not to begin panting aloud. He hated these people so much, and now that he had something on them, a small but strong part of him wanted to plant lead into each cultist he saw. After a moment, the light snapped off, and then the squeaking began again. Shepard got to his feet and headed for the flickering light. He came around some crates, found himself behind the water wheel. There were many runes burned into the struts, and a circle around the base that he suspected were either utter nonsense or obscure sigils and glyphs from ancient Roma. These did not interest him, but they did make him feel anxious. Crazy people were not always easily bullied or threatened. He walked around the rim of the oversized Ursine well with quick but cautious steps. The squeaking from whatever the cat was doing on the ladder hopefully covered the sounds of his footfalls. In the moment, he came around and discovered the boy, Blake, his nephew. The child that might have been his son if things had been different, if things had been better. Spread eagle on the board and upside down so that his small, dark body formed a prescribed X. Blake seemed unconscious. Shepard was surprised at how uniformly black the boy's fur was. One of the things that helped convince Lynn to sleeping with his cousin was how similar his coat pattern and coloring was to her husband. Nature had other ideas in mind, and had given them a sport without blaze, mask, or saddle. If Wally hadn't been in on the plan all along, it would have undone them. Shepard didn't spare a moment to gawk, except to wonder briefly how his wolf ally was going to react when the bastard child survived this. He shoved his gun into his belt and grabbed the buckles that held the child in place, pushing aside useless thoughts. It only mattered what Lynn wanted. It only mattered that she looked at him the way she used to. If he saved her child, Shepard felt Blake stirring within seconds of pulling at the buckle on his right leg. He finished loosening it with his still clumsy fingers, and then dropped to his knees to shush the boy. Alert, golden amber eyes glared back at him, and then the child began to struggle and growl. Shepard grabbed the boy's snout and discovered the black cloth muzzle was already in place. "Hush, I'm getting you out of here," the dog whispered. The boy calmed a little, but still seemed ready to fight. Shepard left the gag in place. Blake could howl and cry all he wanted to after they got out of this place. He moved to the boy's hands next, noting the boy's half-webbed fingers in abstraction. His ears patrolled the room, seeking out any signs of the cult. There couldn't be just the one. Instead of footsteps, he heard the sound he'd been dreading without realizing it, a rapid series of drips that grew faster with each plop. The sound of a trickle of water that preceded the stream that would be turning the wheel. He got the boy's hands free and braced himself to hold the wheel against the clockwise motion that usually signaled the beginning of the Alsatian service. Blake, impatient for rescue, didn't need to be told to untie himself. Growling, the boy folded himself with youthful limberness and began to pull at straps on his left leg. The squeaking from above stopped as the sound of rushing water filled the warehouse. In a little more than a second, the water came crashing down on the wheel. The wheel moved, and Shepard shouted with surprise when the machine threw him to the right. It took a precision few seconds for the detective to climb back to his feet, stars in his eyes.
They built it backwards.
They built it backwards. The water wheel spun counterclockwise. Now he understood what the revved converter had meant. The wheel of sacrifice turned the wrong way, and even a lapsed Christian like Shepard was appalled by the blasphemy of the very idea, a giant undoing. Shepard growled but found himself somehow frozen until he caught the panicked amber eyes of the boy. Blake had spun around maybe 3 or 4 times, the muzzle pulled off now. His black hands held onto the board and he was chewing at the leather straps on his legs. Still the boy pleaded. You couldn't do this flopping about. Shepard tried to hold the wheel in place, but the released water turned the paddles too strongly. He was either lifted off his feet, or the wheel threatened to pull him down and into its working. He couldn't brace himself against the axle supports, because they were on the other side of the damn contraption. His mind tried to work quickly, but it was sluggish. Shepard was vaguely aware that he must have hit his head when the wheel threw him across the room. He wouldn't allow himself to feel pain later, maybe when he was dead and in hell. Not now. He had a mission. Shepard knew the cultists would be in soon. The turning wheel set a series of events into motion, but the cultists had their own secret rituals that they had to observe. He had only moments, maybe 5 minutes. He remembered the crates on the other side, and he thought maybe there was something he could shove into the wheel spokes to hold it still long enough to get the pup off the wheel and out of here. He ran, splashing in the water, filling the pool, as the wheel turned relentlessly. For a moment, he thought it was Diego, who stepped out of the shadow into his way, but it was the cat in the black cassock that had turned the water on. Shepard barely had a moment to curse the freaking feline and his own luck before grabbing for a gun that was no longer in his holster. The cat used that moment of confusion to crack the brick-sized battery of his lantern into the dog's skull. Fireworks went off in Shepard's skull as he struggled to keep his feet. He was hit twice more and fell to his knees, unable to see what was coming next. But the cat was panting and unable and unwilling to press his advantage. The flashlight came on, a sun swimming amidst the stars, filling the warehouse. Shepard's eyes involuntarily closed and blinked with pain that refused to wait until he was resting in hell. He couldn't think of nothing else but the pain for a moment. But then the stubborn pride refused to let him slip off into darkness. A cat was trying to get the better of him, and the very core of his soul would not let that happen. So when the sun rose up to deliver one final blow, Shepard scrambled forward into the shadowy mass that was the cat. The heavy flashlight slammed into the base of his tail, and Shepard barely heard his own howl of pain. He was too busy delivering what he thought must be kidney punches, but who knew how stupid cats kept their insides. The cat grunted enough to let Shepard know that the blows were landing close enough to do their job. There was a tipping point where cat and dog seemed ready to fall to the floor, but then Shepard found himself against an A-frame of the water wheel housing without really realizing what was holding him up. The cat stumbled against a bolt the size of a fist, and Shepard used that moment to push him down and to the left. There was a horrible crunching noise and then a sputtering cough that might also have been a scream. The sound of rushing water changed strangely then, and Shepard was startled to realize that he'd lost track of the damn cat. No more blows landed on him, so Shepard told himself that he'd won, somehow. He wanted to celebrate his victory without a healing nap right where he stood, but the sound of frustrated water whispered dire things in his numb mind. He had a mission, he had to keep moving. A large flashlight had fallen during the fight and had painted a cone of light on the stairwell that he had used to get in here. Picking up the flashlight proved harder than he expected. His hands had trouble clenching, and his fingers were swollen again and bleeding. They denied that they ever been used to pick up anything. The wrappings were gone, and he nearly fell over from the wave of the dizziness as he pondered what he'd expected them to do with a flashlight. He picked up the flashlight with his fist and moved the light around him, expecting to catch a sneaky cat leaping at him. The immobile water wheel surprised him, and he almost missed the black-clad trunk of the cat. The cultist's body had gummed up the works. Shepard coughed a laugh. So much for always landing on your feet. But the words would not come out. Instead he whispered, "They took my baby." His mission. The sound of Lynn's sobbing was louder than all the other sounds in the warehouse, and it turned him as steadily as if he was a water wheel to hear tears. He couldn't bear to hear her cry any longer. Shepard limped back around the wheel, letting the water splash on him. The boy had almost freed himself now that the wheel had stopped spinning, which was a good thing. Shepard's hands were still locked up as fists. The dog could only hold the boy up at the 9 o'clock position, as the last buckle loosened enough that he could pull free. Shepard caught him and then had to catch himself as the wheel twitched. "My shoes," the naked wolf dog said, as Shepard let him down. "My mama's going to murder me if I lose my shoes." The dog found this the funniest thing in the world, but he couldn't find a laugh to share with his nephew. "I'll buy you new ones," Shepard promised instead. "We've been lucky. I don't know where bad people are, but they'll be back soon." A small black hand tried to slip between his useless fingers, but it felt like tiny daggers slipping into the reluctant clam. In his hand was the clam. He hissed in pain, and the boy instantly grabbed the dog's wrist instead. Blake picked up the flashlight with his other hand and looked up at Shepard. "They are doing something with the compass points and ley lines," the Blackford child said. "They were waiting for 100 turns to see if I drown, I think. They were speaking in Latin, so I only understood some of it." Shepard nodded and looked at the floor. The water was now up to where the boy's head had been. The overflow stream of water went off into the darkness. 100 turns. They're going to notice the wheel stop turning if they are counting it off somewhere. Then, through the fuzziness in his head, he caught up with something the boy said. He wasn't sure he heard right over the noise of the gushing in water. "You know Latin?" The wolf dog simply nodded and pulled at Shepard. "We gotta unstop the water wheel before they notice." Shepard staggered after the boy. His mind was so fuzzy that he couldn't remember the pup's name. It started with a B. By the time he realized that he shouldn't let the boy see what was blocking the wheel, it was too late. "Ick," was all the boy said before reaching over to tug at the corpse. Shepard tried but couldn't get a grip on the body. The wheel twitched again, and a few more ribs cracked under the wheel's relentless pressure. The boy's ears went back, angry but not afraid, and Shepard found a preserved streak of pride in the boy's lack of fear. "This isn't going to work," Shepard gasped. Then he heard voices in the distance, or he thought he did. The water made it hard to be sure. "Let's get out of here, Blackie." His fingers made a half-hearted attempt to point at the dark corner he knew the stairwell was in. The pup nodded and pulled Shepard towards the door. "Come on," the boy whispered. "Wolves can see in the dark." They left the flashlight behind as shouts of outrage cried out from the other side of the wheel. The door creaked as loudly as Shepard had feared it would, but it would not be helped. All the ground-level exits were guarded. After only a few steps, Shepard ran into the boy, who was now shivering. "What's wrong?" "Wolves can see in the dark." A note of fear now crept into his voice. "But..." Shepard didn't wait to find out if he was figuring out that he wasn't all wolf, or if he was just realizing that he was as blind as any species in pitch darkness. He just grabbed the kid and started running up the stairs. "That's an old wives' tale, Blackie," he reassured the boy, who now clutched him as if he'd never let go. "My brother said..." Shepard never had any brothers, but he knew how it went. Especially when they can see that there was something different about their little brother. "They're assholes. Now hush." Even loopy, Shepard remembered he'd come down 4 flights. It was a muscle memory of sorts that allowed him to climb the stairs unerringly in the dark, even with nursing a bum knee. The door was right where he thought it was, at the top of the little landing. But when he burst out, something was obviously wrong. Half of the offices were gone, and the hallways was lit by a dim glow of the torches down below. Different stairwell. He bleedily realized he was at the wrong end of the building. He put the boy down and tried to catch his breath and his wits. Their ears both rotated sharply in the direction of the stairwell. Footsteps. Cursing. Shepard looked over the railing to the torches below, trying to figure what stairwell he had used so he could get out via that open office window. The wheel had been in the distance. He pulled the boy in that direction and hoped for the best, despite the nagging thought that he'd overlooked something. He was feeling naked without his gun. He found the stairway, but the hallway still didn't look right. The boy was holding his wrist with both hands, the only sign of fear or nervousness that he exhibited. The wailing child was the last thing he needed. He tried to count the office doors from the stairwell, but that seemed wrong. Hadn't there been a first aid kit mounted on the wall? Shepard patted the boy's hands as he felt the sluggish wheels of his own mind continue to turn. The doors of the previous stairwell burst open, and Shepard pulled the young wolf dog into the nearest office before the flashlights could find him. Even as he locked the door behind him, light came on in the hallway and slipped into the frosted glass panel in the top half of the door. There was no leaving this room without this door as long as the floor was lit. Shepard gave the room a quick once-over. The broken window that looked out on the 4th-story drop. No escape that way. There was a desk, but this time there was nothing useful in its drawer except for a rusty letter opener. Then it hit him. Shepard had come down 4 floors, but he'd exited the stairwell on the 2nd floor. The safe way out of here is 1 floor higher. They were trapped. "Hide behind the desk," he whispered, and the boy complied without arguing. He felt a little sick thinking about what a good mother then must have been to raise such a brave lad. Then he cursed himself for allowing his mind to stray. This was hardly the time for emotions and regrets. A shadow moved across the glass pane in the door. The knob was fiddled for a moment, but the old lock held. With a whispered curse, the shadow moved on, and Shepard nearly fell to his knees with relief. Now all he had to do was wait until Diego and some men to show up for the night watchman to summon them. Shepard figured an hour, tops. His head hurt. His fist hurts almost as badly as his head. His knees decided to throb for attention, too. Waiting was never one of Shepard's strengths, but he was pragmatic when he wasn't in a mood. This wasn't the moment for one of his rages. "I could burn this place down," he thought. "Can't remember why, but these I-squared houses go up in a flash. Fox lightning? Insurance fraud? No." Something about the fact you run off in the river. I sweat it out. The timber soaks it up. He was just about to drift off when he heard the scratching at the door. It only took an instant to recognize the sound of a key slipping into the lock. Shepard reached for his gun, but again it wasn't there. His hand wouldn't have been able to grab it if it had been where it belonged. I must have left blood on the doorknob. He signed and re-signed himself to his fate. His luck was always bound to catch up to him. Diego would avenge him, and that the people who'd turned his father against him would finally be brought down. No one killed a policeman in New Amsterdam and got away with it. Not these days. And maybe then would shed a tear for me. A flashlight beam made him flinch when it came cautiously into the room, landing right on him. He glared bravely back into the light, hoping the shadowy figure understood the hatred and contempt he put into it. Well, Detective Shepard, I thought you'd given up on us. Shepard tried to think of a witty comeback. Instead, he settled for a curse and spitting at the cultist in the doorway. The cultist laughed. You killed Brother Blue, rescuing a monster. I'm glad to see he got a few good licks in. Give it up, Shepard coughed, hoping the growl in his voice made him sound tougher than he felt. The place is surrounded. Not yet it isn't. The cultist reached out to his right and pressed a button. A dim bulb came to life over their heads, and Shepard found himself facing Reverend X, the bear leader of the Illuminati Arcana. We've enough friends in the Red Club precinct to make sure we can finish the ceremony first. Good luck with that. Diego and Black are carrying that boy to safety, even as we speak. We're going to put you all in jail for the rest of your lives. The bear laughed and glanced around the room. I don't think so. I have a gecko watching Big Blackie. The wolf hasn't left his apartment since he came home. Personally, I think he's going to be relieved when the devil's spawn is gone. Reverend X stepped backwards into the hallway. He called out to the other cultists without looking away from Shepard. Then he stepped back into the doorway. And if you lied about Waldo Black, I'm guessing that you lied about your partner. Shepard found himself steaming at being caught out. Put me on your wheel of undoing. Sacrifice me instead. Ursine features registered surprise in the news. Detective, that's a wheel of exorcism, not a wheel of sacrifice. No one was supposed to die tonight. Once the demon is out of the boy, we are going to release him. Sound of a gun cocking was like punctuation in his next statement. You will not be so fortunate. Shepard laughed. Lycanthropes can be exorcised? Forgive me for laughing, but I think you're the one lying now. My father spent many years trying to get me to buy the bullcrap you're pushing. Two hooded figures appeared behind the Reverend. From their masks, Shepard guessed that they were rhinos. Shepard, if only you were as good a student as you are a bully and a scoundrel. Lycanthropes are only one of the curses the seventh son of a seventh son might be inflicted with. In the case of Blake Black, it seems that he's a black dog, the incarnation of death. Death is going to follow him everywhere unless he's purged of the demon. Brother Blue's death is proof of that. Shepard could not have stopped himself from laughing if he tried. Even though every guffaw was like needles being shoved into his temples, he laughed until the bear shoved a gun between his eyes. The Reverend was not used to such disrespect. Shepard was pleased to see the rhinos were hanging back. The bear's mask was blocking the doorway, and they couldn't enter. Every second that he could stall them increased the chances of his arrival. Don't you get it? You're the victim of a long game con. What are you talking about, Shepard? Shepard forced his ears up and gave the head cultist a great big smile. Big Blackie always knew you were in the background, waiting for him to have a seventh son. He knew you needed him to have a seventh child so you could kill it and save the world with your mystical magic mumbo jumbo. It's not mumbo jumbo. And in knowing that, You think he was going to whelp a 7th child just so he could watch it grow up to die at your hands? He's a wolf, not a moron. He's as sly as a fox. So you know what he did? Detective, what are you saying? His wife wanted another child so bad, and she's just too damn nice of a person to believe that a bear like you can even exist. She's so stupidly, so persistently, and so unbendingly a good woman that we almost didn't talk her into it. But you know, wine is a wonderful social lubricant, and when she was lubricated enough, I took her and gave her that child she wanted. Blake is my son, not Big Blackie's. He has no 7th son. The Reverend looked staggered. He even took a few steps back as he processed the mostly true story the shepherd had fed him. It would have been true but for this war injury, and if he could spare his idiot cousin any trouble in the future, so much the better. Shepherd hoped the cult leader would decide to cut his losses and run. A grim resolve seemed to come over the bear, and Shepherd knew things weren't going his way. Come on! What do you think this maid from Washington Heights would even come to me? We went to high school together. We were in love until she thought I died in a coyote attack out west. Waldo gave his blessing, knowing I'd do anything to stop you. You're going to kill this boy for nothing! I can almost believe you, Shepherd. The gun came up again. But you see, your father told me all about your injuries in the Emerald War. He was quite upset that his line was coming to an end. He turned to the hooded figure behind him. The kid's got to be hiding in his room. He was too doped up to get very far without help. Then before Shepherd could stall further, the black body leapt across the room with a scream. It landed on the bear and tried to stab him with a heavy cassock with a pencil. The Reverend did a little dance for a second, and then Blake was on his arm trying to pull the gun from the bear's grip. There was a little snapping noise that made Shepherd sick to hear it. A finger? An arm? A rib? Then one of the rhinos was there, pulling the frantically struggling child off his leader's arms. It took both rhinos to drag the boy away. As he screamed and cursed, he didn't cry. And, for that, Shepherd took morbid pride as he struggled to stand up. I am not going to die sitting on my tail. The detective mostly made it up when Reverend X turned his attention back to the dog. I could almost believe that he's your son. Such a persistent pain in the rump. It's true, he's completely innocent. But your own light, he cannot be the monster you said he was. The bear raised his weapon, and Shepherd found himself looking down the barrel. The cult leader said something else that sounded sarcastic and revealing, but the battered Alsatian was too busy staring down the barrel of the gun, pointing at his head. The barrel of the gun and the broken pencil jammed tightly into it. That kid. It was an idea straight out of a knuckle pulp magazine, but even the thin Great War era revolver had enough of a kick to push past a jam of wood and graphite. All the child had accomplished was to get him shot with 2 types of lead, but Shepherd felt a weird sense of pride in the attempt. This kid was a fighter. Do it! Detective Alan Shepherd commanded as he strained to his full height. The gun went pop and they both blinked. The broken end of the pencil moved out an inch and a tendril of smoke rose up the wrong end of the gun. The cylinder turned with only the slightest delay behind the misfire. Shepherd found his hand suddenly gripping tightly on the letter opener he'd pulled from the desk. Now look who's shooting blanks, you cowardly bastard! The taunt did the job. The Ursine's look of confusion was replaced by a sneer of hatred. The gun centered on the dog's head, an impossible target to miss at this distance. Whatever satisfaction the bear felt in pulling the trigger was wiped off his snout by the exploding gun. Shepherd was on top of the flailing body in the next instant, stabbing at the throat and eyes of the bear. In a few moments, the cult leader was drowning in his own blood. It was a terrible death, but not terrible enough. Shepherd wished his dying could have taken longer. The Ursine deserved much worse. Still, he didn't have the time to spare. He staggered into the empty hallway. The rhinos either weren't familiar enough with firearms to know the difference between the sound of a gunshot and the sound of a misfire, or they were too intent on getting the kid back on the wheel. They were rhinos, so Shepard assumed that they weren't tired for their brains. He was just grateful that they hadn't come back to investigate. His head spinning, he slid down the wall to catch his breath. He'd come very close to dying this time. Only the Reverend's ignorance about firearms had saved him. The bear hadn't noticed the pop and no kick of a squib load. A small worried voice reminded him that the stupid Ursine had, almost impossibly, caused the same catastrophic failure the boy had intended.
I'll just take that as a sign from God, then.
In a few moments, he began to crawl down the hallway and considered his options. The way out was one flight up and then walk across the 2 rooftops in a short leap that suddenly seemed very daunting. Yet the sound of taking on who knows how many quotas was impossible, especially without backup, especially without guns. Retreat was the only sensible option. It was sheer willpower that got him to the stairwell and to stand again. Force of will made his fingers open and dropped the slim letter opener to the floor so that he could grip the door handle instead. Absolute stupidity made him go down the steps and not up. He walked down in the dark. Whatever part went to the light in the hall hadn't been turned on. Shepard took his pain and belted into a cudgel with every step. He flexed his fingers, leaving blood on every step, leaving blood on the railings. He was getting too old for this. Hate and rage filled him until he panted like a drug fiend. He wasn't even conscious of having a plan, or rather, Shepard had fallen back to his plan A. Luck, pluck, and bull-headed determination. He would just keep breaking things until something gave. It always did.
It always would,
he growled when he counted 4 landings. The 2nd floor landing. He got his swollen fingers around the doorknob. He saw stars, and it took him a moment to realize that there weren't any lights lit on his floor, just the glow of the torches below leaving the floor in even darker shadows than before. He heard the water pouring onto the wheel, and he hoped he wasn't too late. He took off his coat. He was too hot to wear it. He didn't drop it, even though he willed his fingers to let it go. Shepard nodded as if agreeing to some invisible stranger. There was a reason for this. He'd have to roll with it, trusting his luck. He found himself heading to the ladder he used before, the ladder to the water valve. Shepard barely heard the squeaking of the valve until he was right next to the ladder. The torrent began to diminish, and suddenly it gone except for a small distant roaring that the Alsatian realized might only be in his ears. Shepard leaned on the steel ladder to catch his breath until he felt the vibration of someone coming down it. He forced himself to stop panting and somehow managed to take a slow, deep breath as long white tail came into view. Too thick and long to be a rhino tail, so that meant he had a chance.
Shepard. He's a good Alsatian. I'll give him that. And we should cover what is one of the strengths within the prey that we have consumed. There is something that is known as a perspective when it comes to writing. There is first-person perspective, there is third-person perspective, and then there is second-person perspective. First person is sometimes a common one, where you're narrating from the person's point of view. Second person perspective is that you're in the story is that either you are the side character or you are the protagonist. And then there is the third person perspective. This is where you are an unknown entity that's there. So there are 3 types of third person perspectives. Third person far. This is where you observe the world as it is. You do not have any interpretations of the person's thoughts. You don't have any other interpretation of where their emotions are. What you see is where it is on those pages. Close third is where you have access to the protagonist's thoughts and emotions. You know what he's thinking, you know what he's about to do, depending if the story hunter wills it or not. And then there is the third one, which is a little more risky. It's much like the second person perspective, which is also risky. This third perspective is also known as omniscient, is where you have everyone's thoughts. You know what everyone's thinking, you know what everyone's doing, and that type of thing becomes hard to follow. There are some things that do it right, and there are others that don't do it so much. One thing that comes to mind is what did it right. One thing that comes to mind, what did it the best, in my opinion, are within the anime community. And even then it gets a bit iffy. But I'm sure a few anime series have popped up into your head. So let's go over some of the weaknesses within this prey. There are certain word uses that are awkward, that makes it confusing to understand. Where in the story, when it talks about the cat who was a wraith, in the pages it actually says wrath. So what should we do for these adjustments? Is that you proofread. Proofread is one of the most important things when it comes to writing your own pro. And you're writing your own prose and story. Is that you proofread it. Is that sometimes it helps when you say it out loud and follow the words exactly as you do it. If there's something that doesn't sound right, and then you might need to go back and change it. The theme within the story is very consistent throughout. It's honor and the stakes of honor. You see Shepard put his entire career on the line. It was about the honor within himself. When we return, we will finish off the rest of this parcel, this prey, and see if Shepard will survive this ordeal. And then at the end of that narration, I will cover my final analysis of the story, as well as the rest of the book. We will recap what worked and what didn't, and offer suggestions that would help Mr. Kiefer and other story hunters be better during their hunt. So if you'd like to mention something that you have found within this portion of the prey that is good or bad, share it with us. If it's something that is bad, be sure to offer a suggestion as to how the story hunter can improve. And also offer other suggestions that other story hunters could use in their own hunt as they take down large prey. So if you'd like to offer a prey of your own, which is either prose or film, or anything that you like to share it with us, and we'll feast on it together, and we will give you our best analysis review. I encourage for any visitors to join our pack and help us restore our hunting grounds and reawaken the creative beasts and those around you. But be alert and be ready to hunt when you hear our howl.